Hi, welcome. Thank you all for coming out. I'm Beth Taylor, co-director of the Nonfiction Writing Program, and this is the second in an occasional series of readings by our Nonfiction Writing Program faculty. The first time we had one of these readings, we had new books out by Catherine Imbriglio and Carol DeBoer Langworthy and Ed Hardy and myself. And now we have our recent faculty with new books out. So I'm going to just introduce each one of them, and then they will come up one at a time and give a little reading, talk a little bit about the writing thereof, and then if we have some time, we'll have some Q&A. So immediately to my right here is Susan Kushner-Resnick, which many of you know, I'm sure. She's been a writer and journalist for 27 years, writing for publications ranging from obscure alternative weeklies to mainstream newspapers like the Providence Journal, the New York Times Magazine. Her first book, Sleepless Days, One Woman's Journey Through Postpartum Depression, was the first memoir of PPD by an American author. Her second book, Goodbye, Wives and Daughters, won a Montana Book Award, a High Plains Literary Award, and a gold medal from the Independent Book Publishers Association. Her most recent book, You Saved Me Too, was published in October 2012. She teaches creative nonfiction in the Nonfiction Writing Program. Next to her is Kate Shapira, the author of four full-length books of poetry, most recently The Soft Place, and her 8th chapbook will appear in this coming summer. In addition to teaching creative nonfiction and the academic essay in the Nonfiction Writing Program, she will be teaching a new course in medical narrative this coming year. In Providence, she also works as a writer in the schools, and she co-curates the Publicly Complex Reading series. Next to her is Michael H. Stewart. He's the author of A Brief Encyclopedia of Modern Magic. I love the names of the publishing companies that put out Michael's books. This one was put out by The Cupboard. His next book, Almost Perfect Forms, was put out by Ugly Duckling. And his next book, Sebastian, an illustrated book for adults, was put out by Hello Martha Press. And his next book, The Hieroglyphics, was put out by Mud Luscious Press. Where is that phrase from, poets? Thank you very much, E.E. Cummings. Most recently, his web project, The Answers, a series of unhelpful answers to questions submitted by strangers, has been turned into a book and is slated for publication later this year. In 2010, he was the Rhode Island Council for the Arts Fellow in both fiction and poetry, and his work has appeared in an array of journals and anthologies. Currently, besides teaching creative nonfiction and the research essay, he is the digital scholar in residence for the Nonfiction Writing Program and the English department. And next to him is Robert Ward, who completed his undergraduate degree in humanities at the University of Glamorgan in Wales in 1994, followed by a master's and PhD in American literature at the University of Leeds in England. He has published 2 books, the edited Nelson Algren, a collection of critical essays, and Understanding James Leo Herlihy. He's also written essays on prison writing, left-wing writing of the 1930s, and memoir. He teaches the academic and research essay in the Nonfiction Writing Program, and next fall he will teach a new course on memoir. So we will begin with having Susan Resnick.
Thank you very much. My book has a very long subtitle. It's called, the main title is You Saved Me Too, and the subtitle is What a Holocaust Survivor Taught Me About Living, Dying, Fighting, Loving, and Swearing in Yiddish. And it's the story of my 14-year friendship with a Holocaust survivor and how we changed each other's lives and sort of the wacky adventures we had. I started this book as soon as I met this man. He came up and just began talking to me. But I couldn't figure out what to write about him. I just kept taking notes and running into bathrooms into my car to write down every little thing he said that was brilliant or hilarious. And he knew I was working on a book about him, and he'd ask me, how's the book coming? And I'd say, I just don't know what to say about you. And when I was driving up to his deathbed, as a part I'm going to read in a second, I realized that I was not working on a book about him. I was working on a book about us and about how our relationship worked. And while I was driving, I also figured out the structure for the book, which I structured around the day of his death, and the point of view, which was second person. It's all a conversation that I'm having with him. So that's what I'm going to read 5 little sections. A few of them will illustrate how I did that, and then the last 2 will illustrate something else. So this is called The Other Preface. I talk to strangers. Everyone who hears the story of my odd and beautiful relationship with a quirky man who proved that the final solution wasn't final at all asks the same question. How did you meet him? I talk to strangers, I tell them, and so did he. When Aaron Lieb started speaking in an accent thick with the old country, as if we were in the middle of a conversation, of course I spoke back. Our conversation lasted for more than 14 years. Aaron was fiery and warm, irrational and perceptive, terrified and heroic. He was also my soulmate, my faux father, my son, my crush, and my cause. Before I became his healthcare proxy and was declared his power of attorney, he would whisper into hospital room telephones that I should pretend to be his niece when I visited, so the nurses would reveal family-only details about his ailments. He frequently told me that I'd saved his life, but he saved mine too, by giving me value as no one ever had before. For most of our relationship, I focused on making sure he got the peaceful and painless life and death he deserved. I strongly believed that he should never feel discomfort again after what he'd endured both during and after the Holocaust. And I did what I could to ensure that. My quest led me to some David and Goliath-like fights with the established Jewish community. It forced me to suppress my temper and learn to be diplomatic with his caregivers. And it taught me to be patient with his fears and demands. Most surprisingly, my years as the manager of Aaron's life showed me that being a good Jew has nothing to do with temple attendance or Hebrew fluency. When someone dies, a long conversation ends. You've been blabbing and blabbing to each other for years and then nothing? How can you not be able to tell him how it ended, what that nurse said at exactly that right time, whether the evidence he promised to send proving heaven exists ever arrived? I don't know if I'll ever be able to stop speaking to Aaron in my mind, but if I could have one more talk with him, this is what I would say. And what I wanted you to take from my little intro was that sometimes a story has to simmer for a long time and ripen, or whatever way you want to put that. And it doesn't mean to throw the story away. It just means wait. It'll show itself. The day that he died was January 9th, 2011. So all the sections have different dates on them. And this section comes right after that preface. These fucking people can't fucking drive. They have no idea that my task on this Sunday morning is more urgent than all of theirs. The only mission of equal importance would involve escorting life in. But I know that's not happening because nobody ferrying a passenger with a baby crowning between her legs would be stopping at yellow lights. I'm certain I'm the only driver on Route 1 who's been dreading and preparing for this ride for almost 15 years. The sky is the color of a dull nickel. The snow has melted from enchantment to gloom. I must get to you before it's too late. I promised. I don't make a lot of promises, but I never break them. You should see the lurid secrets locked in my brain, corrupting it like leaky batteries, because I promised people I'd never reveal the stupid things they've done. Affairs, addictions, attempts to exterminate themselves. But my promise to you is neither ugly nor secret, though I'm not sure I've ever told it to anyone else. Just you, over and over. I won't let you die alone. You believe me, but you don't. What if they can't reach me? Do they have your number, you ask? Yes, they have all of them. Don't worry. I'm always telling you not to worry. Sorry about that. Write down your number again, you say. And I do, in block print on unevenly torn pieces of scrap paper that you stuff into your pockets. I obey almost all of your commands, no matter how redundant and ridiculous. It's the least you deserve. How many other people have been rehearsing the lines of their deaths for most of their lives? The light at this giant intersection turns green. The driver in front of me hesitates. Go, I scream. It's Sunday morning. Nobody's on the road. The driver I'm yelling at can't hear me, of course, just like so many others who wouldn't hear me when I was figuratively pointing at you and screaming, "Help him." You can't hear me right now either, but I want you to know about this morning. When the phone flashed your number, I knew what I was going to hear. Crullers, belts, a terrible ache in your heart. Some request or complaint that I've heard 500 times before. Funny how I almost always answer those calls in a tone of panic. What? I want to yelp that into the caller's ear, but this time I sighed with annoyance because I was certain it was nothing but a reminder that you're still alive and that you want to see me. You know I come every Sunday, so why call? Don't you trust me? The man's voice was alarmingly calm as he explained how it had played out. I'll be right there, I said when he finally paused. Who the hell speaks so slowly? Oh, the man said, snapping to life. You're coming? I'm coming. Can you fucking believe that? I wonder if you said your line to the doctor this morning. Pain in my chest. If someone had raked and bagged every word you ever said, these 4 would fill the most sacks. There were variations, of course. The chest, you'd mutter, drawing your fingers across your sternum. Or a full sentence in a clear voice, as if you were making this announcement for the very first time. I got a pain in the chest. Dozens of medical professionals spent thousands of dollars investigating that pain. Their reaction is Pavlovian and possibly a law. The words chest and pain spoken in the same sentence in the presence of white coats cannot be ignored. They scanned and EKG'd and enzyme tested you over and over, but they never found anything to fix. I knew what was wrong. Your mother, your father, your brother and his wife and their baby, your sister and your other sister and your baby sister, the girl who brought you bread in the ghetto, your grandmothers, the kids you sneak glimpses of movies with, everyone. Lose one friend and the chest aches for months. Lose them all and the pain never stops. Why wasn't this obvious to the doctors? This section is from December 26, 1993, and I'm going to read it to you because it shows how I incorporated his past, our past together, and interviews with other people into one section. My favorite love story is yours. You just turned 74, but it was the first time you were ever set up on a date. Your late wife's cousin arranged it after you told her you wanted to meet one of the many Russian women in her building. Your wife had been dead for a year and you wanted company. But why a Russian woman? You'd always regretted not marrying that old country girl you'd met in the displaced persons camp. Was this your way of rectifying that mistake? The woman thought of a few candidates. She visited 2 to make your case. Their friend Vera happened to be visiting too. The other ladies weren't interested in you. I'll meet him, Vera said. She was 71 and had recently arrived in America after years of Soviet oppression. She wanted to meet Americans and learn to speak English well. As a former professor of German, she knew the only way to master a foreign language was to speak it. At the very least, she'd get some practice on your date. You dressed carefully. I can imagine the outfit. Button-down shirt, wool sweater vest, neatly pressed trousers, and shined shoes. Maybe even a tie. You would have driven the Buick Skylark from your old people's apartment building to hers. Yours was a little nicer with its indoor gardens and chandeliered dining room. Hers smells of mothballs and stuffed cabbage. It was a long walk down several hallways to her apartment. Finally, you stood outside the door, number 141. You loved that. Your first blind date and the woman's apartment number is the same one as the one on your skin. For 50 years, every time you'd taken off your shirt at night or reached out to adjust your side view mirror on a summer day, you saw those numbers, plus 3 more, 141324, the brand the Nazis gave you when they thought you were theirs. Was it a sign? I like to think so. The first times I look at him and thought, he won't come to me next time, Vera said. He's younger than me and so handsome. But she was wrong about 2 of those things. After talking for about an hour, you asked her to go to dinner with you the following week. By the 3rd date, you rarely went a day without seeing her. The first kiss came about a month after you knocked on her door. Shortly after that, you stopped sleeping at your apartment. You settled into a sweet routine. To McDonald's for coffee almost every day, to the Pancake House every 2 weeks, dinners at a famous old-school steakhouse where you ordered fish and she ordered chicken. You shopped at all the local discount stores where you liked to buy her things, a necklace for no reason at all, or a VCR, a bigger mattress. She, in return, gave you a new family. Her children and their children welcomed you into their lives. The relationship wasn't perfect, of course. You got cranky and yelled at her sometimes, which her esteemed late husband had never done, but you always apologized and she always forgave you. You and Vera once argued when I was over for a visit. As you both forced those strange hard candies on me, you bickered about when you'd give up your apartment and move permanently to her building. It was a classic girl-boy fight, and you hung on for a while, then gave in suddenly and unexpectedly, as you always do. Vera thanked you. You tried to hide your aw shucks smile. The most romantic thing about you two is that you connected despite being so different. She is the highly educated daughter of doctors. You are the 5th grade graduate raised by a woman who couldn't read. She translates poetry while you watch wrestling. She has great-grandchildren and you have nobody. You have nothing in common except the fact that you both survived the great 20th century attempts to snuff out the Jews. I liked that when we first met, you were both living embodiments of Jewish history, symbols of our endurance. I guess you still are, though so much has changed. She is in this building too, but you don't see each other much. She's lost all that English you helped her learn. And finally, the last section I'm going to read, and I think I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to read all of it, but this section is called 1939 to 1941, and it shows how I condensed 2 years of history that I had to get into the book, but I didn't want it to weigh it down, how I condensed that into 3 pages so things would move ahead. I'm going to start in the middle. People from your town who went through the same acid days of you have revealed how bad it got. They told me in their taped testimonies about rapes. But that's the middle of this story. You preferred to tell me about the beginning, when you were all still there. It crept up on you. First, you were simply scared of war, like everyone else in Europe. There was bombing in September of 1939. The streets shook and people taped up their windows and hid together in cellars. They were afraid to come out, but then the Germans conquered Poland and made them. They banged the drum until all 3,000 or so Jews gathered in the market square. You saw familiar faces atop Nazi uniforms, sugar factory workers who'd been forced to choose sides, SS or bullet. They made you stand there for hours, shooting bullets in the air to enforce quiet, while they ransacked the houses and took what they wanted. Then they rounded up the men and kept them in a church for 3 days. Then the farmers posted signs, "Don't buy from the Jews." Then the SS set up curfews, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. The streets must be Jew-free. One day your father came home a few minutes after 6 because he'd been at the stable putting the horses away, and they'd beaten him over the head. Then they made you tie yellow strips of cloth around your biceps as if to strap down Jewish might, muscle by muscle. Then they changed the rule to Jewish stars sewn on the front and back of clothing, over the heart, like targets. Then they made you paint the word Jude on your doors. Then the Pole in the Nazi uniform kicked you in the back with his boot because you weren't pushing your wagon down the street quickly enough. And you didn't make a sound because you knew that if you did, you'd be taken to the police station and whipped. Then they arrested all the intellectual Poles and Jews and took them someplace, and no one ever saw them again. And your mother, I'm certain, thank God that she'd never been able to educate her children. Then they took your homes and forced you into a ghetto. Then they squeezed you closer together, like sheep, you told me. Then they had to board up the windows that faced the main street so you couldn't look out. Then the German slapped you across the face because you walked past him and took off your hat. Then the German slapped you across the face because you walked past him and didn't take off your hat. Then they shoved more people into the ghetto from surrounding towns, so some 2-room apartments housed 20 humans, like sheep. And then a little more goes on. Then you left Chiklin, your town. Then things got really bad.
How's my sound? Is that all right? Okay. One of the things that I respect and admire about Sue's work is the kind of attention that she pays. I feel that one of the things that I try to teach you guys and that I try to do myself is pay very, very close attention to what's actually going on and the elements of what's actually going on that will reveal the heart of a story. And that's something that I've tried to do in the stuff I'm going to read tonight. The first book I'm going to read from is called How We Save the City. It's about Providence. More specifically, it's about some changes that have taken place in Providence with who lives where. This piece is called Places in Math. Can it stop doing that? I'll try that. Okay, how's that? Darkness is a substance, thick substance that comes between. Brightness is absence. Don't you know a creation story when you hear one? There's a lot of dough here. There's a lot to involve. There's a lot at this address, an address up for sale. There's a surface mark, an orange mark. Adjacent, it changes value. There's a trick to it. There's a lot of diversity here, a job lot of resentment. A bright blot on darkness changes the tape. There's the rate at which the first posts are driven. Shadows collect by number in the basement, at the downspout, stains. Mike T and I were going to smear the new thresholds with tuna for purposes of elimination. Never got to them. Nothing stays purged. How far will the shadow, and what will it shade? More growth? Potential? How long would it have taken us? And the value of our time? The world, the insect city. The city that goes on, the late city. How long will it take the city before the city? Discount city. The sign lights up. Lights glow, lights new, discount city. The hoverers have found a winner to be brighter than the signs that say, stop speculative development, brighter than Onlyville needs affordable housing, not luxury lofts, than vivimos en este vecindario, pertenece a nosotros, brighter than bright. Judgment is traveling toward migration at a rate, but migration is always farther, always faster. Don't you know the river, almost a stream here, flows back on itself, curls over its shopping bags, its now possessions, packs its inevitable fish? I saw banners streaming through the buildings. They had no place to live. Lift off the angel roofs and insert the Target statuettes, the sainted market. Plant lights to make people walking below the windows feel lonely. Some computations begin this way, with a pure softness, uncontaminated, breathing peacefully, untroubled, a speculative light. No substitute for myth has heretofore been successful. Isolated efforts wheel around the towers like bats, towers the ads along the sides of buses. These people couldn't walk to work. If you weren't one of these, you'd be home now. There's a chair, there's a committee. Panic forces a bubble in neon, housing air, rising. Reach the noonday clot people cross with strollers, not figures, but people. Not signs, but prefigurations. The horror ghost spring becomes tenuous. I saw other people pretending to be ghosts in order to enter the ghost preserve with striped masks on, naturally. Posters hung to imitate habitat. In the stiff cornflowers, milkweed, false wheat bending, Queen Anne's stems with no air of vulnerability, no air at all. So a few of the things that I was working with were the patterns of moving, of money, of what people now refer to as gentrification, of the way that land is used and the way that land that's not being used by people behaves, and how people formulate the idea of home and whose home is where. This next piece is called Weird Math 2, and it's about the calculations among all those things that I just said, and it does something that I also often encourage people to do, which is it works in a source text. It works in parts of a source text in order to, well, in this case, it's sort of to let the source text and its writer kind of have enough rope to hang themselves. This bit that I'm including has that you'll hear from the way that I'm reading it is from a letter to the editor of the Providence Journal, written by a realtor who was caught making not even really that veiled racist references when she was trying to sell one of the new condos in a mill building. The beauty of marble over the beauty of succession. It is always as if heavy plunder were being spoken. Humans manacle each other to the lives they have, end to end. The constraints of their former positions have unfortunately not allowed them the time to engage in the larger neighborhood. In a city of elimination, it became necessary to bulldoze in order to save. Save on chips, save on shoes, save on a 36-inch flat screen, on leather couches, on bedroom sets, a short amount each month longer and longer, a beautiful chainsaw of profit, to fill the house with blossoming sound. It is certainly possible to grow an environment. Snapping at moments, answering questions they brought, they came here with a respect for historic preservation and all the work that has been done to rehabilitate old structures. Of shining stones, exclusive shining, free publication in the bank lobby, the luxury issue. The ghost story says they came here to better themselves, to have things, to do, their kids to get part-time jobs, then to look fully good. The money the family thinks, there's money, and then there's money that's far away. In the end, they feel that it has simply discredited their name. Construction equates hope with speculation. With the overcast, the existing community offers a rich fabric up as sacrifice, offers coexistence up, unzips the skyline upward, the city suit, casts it, sure that one succeeds the other. You don't grow an environment, it grows you. The math of apparition states, if it appears, it is. In an equation, I feel for them. In an inequality, I can't. As real as you can't see, examination, who's closer first, to home, the city, the city's people, the armaments of luxury. The letters, the levels, the vagueness, the weight, everything set up to trap every day. Neither the Santos nor the local product even make a dent in the prospect of remarkable living, offering up, not offering, the ability to displace long-standing residents and bring about. Everyone will still have to be somewhere, the dust of construction like pollen. A big concern of mine personally as a writer, and a concern that I think I transmit to and ask my students to share, is the relationship between the individual and community, between the inside and the outside, between what we feel and perceive and the things that are out there being perceived and causing the reactions. And so I think that a lot of the work that I do has that as it, not just as its task, but also as its emphasis. This next bit I'm going to read takes a slightly different look at that, at the idea of community, of shared responsibility, and the structures of shared responsibility. And it also incorporates an existing text. In this case, it's text from my Social Security statement. This is from The Soft Place, which is my most recent book. Give the kid my notebook to quiet her. Give it to her every year. Give her every year, her head top smelling like an experiment in communal living. In 2016, we will begin paying more in benefits than we collect in taxes, leaking through to the secure side of a compact between generations prepared especially for Kate Shapira. You have saved enough credits to qualify for benefits. At your current earnings rate, if you continue working until your breath rags out, compare its slow photogravure to resonance scanning, census and backscatter, narrow tones stingy to travelers. The benefits of giving accrue by a calendar you can't trust and can't spare. Whether or not you can spare it, it's wanted. We give the year to someone, the benefit of the year, the doubt. I have a lot to give, but fear it may be found on me and confiscated in the moony light of many bodies. We need to resolve these issues soon to make sure to provide a foundation of protection for future generations. Troublesome catching and condensing, bottles of breast milk, even with their high fat content, getting old, waiting colostomy bags and seeps in the sides of transit, cupping the inarticulate flesh with inadequate hands. There had just been these new TSA regulations with the backscatter machines, and so that idea also of what is shared and what is protected made its way into this work. In not the most giving environs, according to the 2010 census, strangers offer their meaning to strangers. This statement can help you plan for your financial future. The kid is batshit restless. Mirror and multiply her. Adjust downward, squash the real her against your side. Know her by offering enough sides to go around. If there isn't much, personally, what there is can't dispense glittering fish from its midst, or money like dried and pressed love. Oh, get me into the museum, get me past scanners and in with the lush pictures that fold out so. Ask me if wanting can be offering. Ask if I want to be profligate of your time. What a pocket of the apartment is rich and fine in, seams of southern light, dust and crumbs in which something could probably grow, cracks, creases, surprise, cheap dirt-printed installed appliances, none of which gets any love letters. Dishwasher breaks filled with larvae and water. That really happened. What we give may not be of our substance. It may have stuck to us in passing, all that earning is. You have earned enough credits to qualify for benefits. If you become disabled, a stroke, say, stroking you through a wire right now, a hand will reach out, but not all the way out. Rubber hand for appearance's sake, or a starfish weak of suction that, cut off, won't become many hands, a hand that isn't secretly a uterus either, a hand in grasp unable to clear the jar, a topo map of the promised land. Women behind me are tribulating about birth and children, talking about flying, patting each other down. I walked right through with a map of the enemy marked in secret, wrapping my midsection, turning and turning as it ever more joyously unwound, pulling off skin with it. I had carried it so long, a little movie within the movie. A line winding through in slow motion. We like to think of generous people as us, gentle, generative degenerates, hung over like a flap. I like to think of myself as a fishy dispenser, a porous border, a conductor. The smell of taking care dwells in the starred sections, hangs over the very most giving territory in the hotly disputed map. Disembark there to find a crystal region dotted with abandoned prostheses, empty bottles, misinformed genitals. Reflections of beings of pure light circulate, landing oddly and cyclically, like the reflections of hazard lights, emergencies, alarms, arrests. Because there are no bodies, there are no lines. If we say the opposite is security, we've traveled. That was my priority and my mistake, clothing me again in light, sealing me with rubber, serving me right. If we say the opposite of me is sitting opposite me, sits in my lap before it transfixes me, is going through before me. If our records are wrong, remember, the opposite of me is sitting in me, waiting to emerge like a gift, a benefit. Make my bed across the barred seats, the best of it. This last bit is stretching the limits a little bit. It is fictional. I secreted little presents for the TSA about my person. Chocolates and foil, a butthole-tucked bouquet, like an advent calendar. I even thought of this while I was awake. Were there to be no changes, there would be enough to pay only 76 cents for each dollar. Were they to search me, they would find more and more of them. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Kate. Those were lovely. And thank you guys all for coming out. I'm going to read a couple of pieces which are sort of in that all the work I read of yours is transitional. It's not yet done. It's still in process. And so I thought it might be fun to read some pieces that are also at that awkward age, that place where they really haven't found their form yet, but which they've got something sort of solid to them. This first piece is one I've been toying with for quite a few years, actually. And I'm not sure what's ever going to become of it, but it's sort of a travel narrative. And the part that I'm going to read you is the first day, well, the travel to and the first day in Stockholm. So I'll start. I woke up this morning with a long blonde hair inexplicably in my mouth. It must be one of C's, but I haven't seen her in a month. I believe I told you about her. She always drinks vermouth. She's named after the capital of a place I've never been. On her nightstand, there are no books, but just stacks of maps. Anyway, I can't explain the hair. Nonetheless, I'm currently in the shuffle of travel. A train to a bus to a plane. A short while in Iceland, of which here's a story. There's an Englishman on a drunken dare with sailors. He went to a small island about 40 miles off the coast and lived in a cabin alone for a year. By the way, this is true. When the whalers came to get him, they found the bodies, I almost said corpses, but we reserve that word against the dead, of 3 polar bears surrounding the cabin. Assuming he was dead, they began to head back to the ship, but they were stopped when they heard him reciting a poem. It was 100 stanzas that he'd written in his time alone and memorized. Here's another story. When Sweden and Iceland finally made peace, it became against the law to speak ill of a Swede in jest or song. Then I land about midday in Sweden. I do not know what to expect or what it will look like. The train is very clean and quiet. The ticket collector is a girl with short black hair. There is something punk about her, despite the gray uniform, the gold buttons. Outside, every available wall has a bit of graffiti. There are occasional piles of construction equipment. It reminds me of the train into Providence. At the metro, the man would rather not talk to me in English. My number is 475. I have to check, but it turns out there are 475 pages in the book I'm reading. That it's only true if you count the in pages and the title page. 475 is also the area code of some place in Connecticut. The subway is dense like Madrid, but it's very quick. Gamstan. I follow O's lovely directions. The guitar player is playing, not the violinist, but despite her instructions, I tip. Up 2 blocks, a right. Then I look for the arch, Buzz the Buzzer. Inside there is a poodle, stacks and stacks of newly arrived books, and 2 co-workers. O gives me a pocket map that I am now flipping through. I have walked a bit through the old town. The cobblestones, if I remember correctly, have names given to them by cyclists according to their viciousness. I am obviously a tourist, but I order in mangled Swedish. A girl with a neck tattoo, an Iron Maiden shirt, close haircuts, a menagerie of languages, and more tourist. Lunch is salmon and potato pie with coffee and mixed salad. I'm eating in the basement older than anything I've ever seen in my life. It is hip. The Swedish drape on the furniture, it might as well be Park Slope. I expand my spiral, buy some tea for the house. It rains. I see the statue of St. George and the Dragon. I see cathedrals, the royal palace. Things are duly impressive. I meet with O when we take the bus to her side of town. She has her black poodle with her. I am tired and find my conversation a little awkward. We go to a traditional Swedish beer hall. On the way there, we walk through a park, a small statue too, and here my notes are unreadable. I don't know who the statue is to, with little people and an obscure quote from this person. But that author, whose name I cannot remember, there is a road here literally paved with his words. Literally, the bricks have got quotes in them. Anyway, it's great. Anyway, liquor is brought by the Silliliter, 360 kroner, a very smoky but terrible whiskey. We share something called an old man's pile. It is very good. I have a knuckle of pork with 3 mustards and mashed Swedes. It's too much to finish. We have coffee again. We return to her place. I meet the roommate, lovely, a bit of a ghost. She's going away to a Greenpeace boat to film a documentary. And a friend. This one lives on a boat, works on a homeless newspaper, and has a lovely accent, something Britishy. We have tea, smoky and vanilla. About the houseboats. They're illegal to live there. It's 1,400 kroner a month in docking fees. The old men will not leave. They come out like trolls the last time the rent was raised by 500 kroner. People live in these tugboats, and the tugboats are like the kind that Mickey Mouse would guide while whistling. I sleep on a pull-out couch underneath a pre-World War I map. There are large and impressive colors. The red of the mountains is arterial. And at this point, it moves into the dream I had that night, which is I'm going to use to transition to another piece I've been writing for a while, which is this collection of dreams recorded. I found that if I put a comforter around me while I take a nap, I have a nightmare, something about the heat. So I Whenever I have writer's block, I give myself a nightmare and then just basically write the nightmare down. So that's where all these pieces come from, except for occasionally there'll be a good one at night, and I'll write that one down. So this was the first one. It was that first night in Stockholm, and you'll see that almost everything that happened that day bled into the dream. Bled's a funny word because of what we're about to... Nonetheless. So anyway, here's the dream. The girl from Geneva removes one by one feathers from her mouth while we sit in a hotel bed and watch a silent film on television. At first, she reads the intertitles for me, but slowly, somehow, I begin to understand them. The movie, which started midway, plays as follows. We see a hero, he's dashing. He's trapped in a wall of a stately place. Intertitle, our hero has gone from one tight spot to another. He shimmies. A cutaway reveals that he's between a debutante's bedroom and her father's study. The father is pacing, he's got a gun held to his chest. The debutante, lovely, dark-eyed, dressed in a transparent slip, is sleeping. Our hero stops and pushes his ear to the wall. Intertitle, what is it he hears? The dreaming girl talks in her sleep. As he listens, he smiles, he swoons, he can't help himself, he whispers to her. She stirs but doesn't wake, and the father investigates the sound. His sweet nothings influence her dream, which she continues to narrate. It's a kind of conversation. She says, I bet you'd be sweet to eat, my pretty, and starts to chew on her pillow. The father smiles cruelly, and he aims his gun at the wall. The hero says, I'll lick your pretty, my sweet. Then the father fires, and she startles awake, looks around, and begins to remove, with a perplexed look, one by one feathers from her mouth while the wall behind her bleeds. And now here is the nightmares. The 13th of January. The undertaker, when he opened me up, found a garden of tumors, and despite himself he murmured, but they are beautiful. 14th of February. I have watched her nibble on odd things: hair, paint chips, fingernails, paper, ice, needles, strings, cigarette butts, burnt matches, chalk, coal, small stones. I met her at the bookstore. She had stolen a page from a book and was eating it. She explained to me that she was slowly making a moon. Right now it's about the size of a dime or a pearl, a bean, a walnut, a child's fist in her womb, and every day her pull is stronger. 17th of February. I'm vagabonding the country with a friend of mine from high school. We've done something reprehensible in Minnesota, and we're bouncing from, I don't know what. And so we're bouncing from one storage area where we squirreled a lifetime of stash to another. We make it to Waco. Someone's hot on our heels when we realize I've left my nails, literally nails, square rather than round, a handful of the wicked things in a hotel room in Utah, and we've got to go back, capture be damned. 26th of February, sometimes I don't remember very much. The sea is a hunger, she tells me, how else the tide? 1 March. Her stigmata is warm. In the dark it has a dull light. Hours before it bleeds, she perfumes the room, a blend of cardamom and the rare, bashful you may say, scent of camelias. 4 of March. They have asked me to embalm my father. And despite my protest, I'm here in the basement. It's my old room with the poster and black light still on the wall, with a bread knife. His belly is distended. I pull from him a handful of seashells, a split garden hose, a wooden owl the size of a baseball, a child's shoe, a bowling ball, keys, and a music box that still works when I try it. 14th of March. We are young and in a rowboat. We take turns diving in. The water is deep and very black, but if you make your way to the bottom, it's lit dimly by these strange flowers that sway with the current. When one of us goes over, the boat shakes violently, and the rest of us must steady it. This would be impossible in difficult water. There is something unnamed but dangerous about what we are doing. I dive back in, long enough from the last time that I am cold that my jaw is making involuntary movements. The water is dark, and then the flowers bloom in response to me. I reach out, I know you shouldn't, and I touch one, and they all explode, slowly, into a fury of brilliantly colored moths, flying and swaying and circling, and already taking the first tentative, occasional taste of my skin. The 4th of April, this is actually my favorite dream. We are watching a speck move across the face of the moon. My father explains, that's Michael Collins. He was one of the 3 went to the moon. Buzz Aldrin. Yeah, okay, never mind. If we had strong enough binoculars, you could see the other 2 still up there, bored and hungry. Been stuck up there since '69. God knows what keeps them alive. He says, you can still hear them sometimes. And he turns on the radio, but it just hisses static at us. Well, sometimes. What are they saying? Not much. We wait. The moon is moving across the sky. I push the binoculars closer until they hurt the ridges of my eyes, and in the black it seems there are colors no one's ever seen. When the radio stutters to life, and we can hear them, they say, "We are the moon men, fuck you." It's been stuck in my head for years. Okay, so the Answers Project is the last thing I'll read from, and these are questions submitted by strangers. I'm just going to read you one or two. They're very short. And I don't know these people, and so sometimes they ask strange things, and I try and respond in kind. And most of these are autobiographical. I want to be something scary for Halloween. Suggestions. Jeans and Nikes with a plastic mask turned backwards, the band leaving a red line on my forehead. We were just old enough not to drive, and we gathered like moths in living rooms and around streetlights, orbiting around pretty girls. Amanda smoking her first cigarette and her face exposed for a moment in the flare of the lighter. We made excuses. Her fingernails were painted black. We made streets long and familiar. Abby sitting so close I could feel her thigh pressed to mine. We talked too loud, and I can remember exactly how the stockings took the gleam from the streetlight. Why am I so lonely was another question. I don't know. You're lovely, and in your grandmother's cardigan, you're absolutely angular. You've got a sharp nose and easy smile. The distance between us, I am sure, could not be worked out. I remember you at the bars. Your mother had taught you to alternate drinks, to never let your cheeks feel warm. I remember you asked to stay at my place for a week or two, books around my apartment split open like birds, fantastic meals abandoned to burn on the stove, and I'd find you crying in the shower. I remember coming home to find you naked in my bed and how cruel it felt to close the door quietly so you wouldn't wake up and to fall asleep in my living room chair. A year later, your dress always a little short as the hem would hint up, perched on a bar stool, tonic and bitters or rum and ginger, so would your smile. Thank you.
Everybody. I was just sat there kind of worrying how I'm going to follow Michael's wonderful insights with a dry academic text, which mine is, and of course Susan and Kate's wonderful, beautiful writing too. My book's on James Leo Hurley, and it's Hurley, and it's a critical, analytical text. And my interest in Hurley started when I watched, or rather rewatched countless times when I was an undergraduate and postgraduate and so on. John Schleisinger's Oscar-winning movie called Midnight Cowboy, which is just this icon of 1960s cinema. It stars Dustin Hoffman and Jon Voight as two hustlers drifting in the underside of 1960s New York. And the movie's final credits cited the 1965 novel of the same title that Schlesinger adapted, and the name of its author, James Leo Hurley. And I kind of noticed that after about the 20th time I watched it. Probably one Saturday night I noticed the name of the author and the name of his novel. So it kind of captured my interest. But the novel was out of print, as were and still are all his other major works, despite a number of them having been turned into popular movies and Broadway and off-Broadway plays at the time. So these texts, and they amount to several plays, 2 collections of short stories and 3 novels, are especially important, I think, because of their concern for the marginalia of post-war American life. And Hurley's fictional world is one populated by urban misfits. They're the victims of backstreet abortions. They're hippie radicals. They're closeted homosexuals. And small-town characters who are just simply frustrated by the boredom of their existence. So after reading all these works, I sat down and kind of ordered them on books and things like that. And I gathered some basic facts about this writer. He was born into a working class family in Detroit in 1927. He's conscripted to the Navy in the last days of the Second World War. He uses his GI Bill because he's terrified of going back to his family in Detroit. So he's got his GI Bill, and he uses it to attend this amazing institution in North Carolina called Black Mountain College, which is an experimental liberal arts college. And he uses his GI Bill to go there. And we also know he had close friendships with the likes of Tennessee Williams, Aeneas Nin, the potter and poet M.C. Richards, the photographer Lyle Bong, and Christopher Isherwood. And we also know that Hurley died by suicide in the fall of 1993. So outside of those facts, and by the way, those facts I kind of gathered by general kind of literary encyclopedias, survey texts of the period, it became clear to me that there were very few critical studies of his writing, except for an unpublished master's thesis and one scholarly essay. And both of these were published in the early 1970s, probably in the wake of the popularity of Midnight Cowboy, of the movie. I found a mine of really excellent information, though, in Aeneas Nin's diaries, at least some of them. So, I was sat with this the kind of lack of knowledge on this writer, and so used to moving around the room. And such a brilliant writer he was, at least I think so. I felt I had to fill this gap in this knowledge. And I managed to convince the Americanist scholar Matthew Broccoli, who was kind of a seminal, who just died just a few years ago, a seminal American scholar and bibliographer. He was at the University of South Carolina Press, and I persuaded him to give me a contract to write this book, Understanding James Leo Hurley, as part of the Understanding American Literature series, which he was the series editor of. Now Beth asked me to speak about the challenges I faced when writing this book, so I'm going to start on that. And I suppose the first challenge I faced was how to write on an author whose work had hardly been written about. And the worry I had, and I still have the worry, is what if I got it all wrong? What if I got all the interpretation of his work wrong? I'm still waiting to be tested on that when another study comes out, maybe. It was, after all, almost a lost body of work, because to paraphrase somebody like Jacques Derrida, it remained largely unseen as a work. And that raised a further question that I know scholars like Carey Nelson grapple with, though I've never really been able to kind of sort out satisfactorily for myself. Does it matter who recovers lost writers and their writing? Does it matter? I still don't know the answer to that question. The second challenge I faced was how to get the time and money to conduct research in the two main archives that held Hurley's correspondence and his manuscripts, and they were at the University of Delaware and Boston University. But thankfully I got a sabbatical and travel grant from the university I worked at in Britain. And if anybody in this room is thinking about a career as an academic life as a career, alongside the love of teaching, the hope of a sabbatical is one of the perks of the job. I want to talk briefly about a third challenge I faced, though, and I want to talk about it in reference to reading a little bits from the book. And it's a challenge that must confront us all as scholarly writers, and if I was to generalize further, all writers. Because as scholarly writers, we read all the books and articles we can on a particular narrow topic. And we fill up our journals with notes, ideas, and plans. But then we have to carve order out of these notes. We have to carve order out of that chaos of these notes. So we look for a controlling idea. I like the term controlling idea. Other people prefer the label thesis, which is kind of fine. But that, anyway, something that gives shape to those rough plans and outlines and drafts and allows us to write even more plans and more outlines and more drafts. And anybody who writes in this room will know exactly what I mean, I'm sure. So I wanted to find that core idea in order to justify the key word, understanding, in the book's title. The trouble is, when I did find that idea, I began to dislike the title, this title, that I had assigned, I was contracted to write. You know, after all, Understanding James Leo Hurley is one of the most boring titles I've ever heard. And it really sounds flat. My new title was much, much better. It was The Art of Being a Person. The Art of Being a Person. The World and Work of James Leo Hurley. So I haven't got the title, but what I tried to do was capture that sentiment in this book's epigraph, which is a quotation from Hurley that I'd just like to read quickly. And by the way, just in case you think he hasn't got a Welsh accent. He's got an American one. He says, being a person was always more important than being a writer. I hope that my stories reflect that. I could be very happy thinking that they did. And I found this really fascinating. You know, as we know, you don't have to make that kind of separation between yourself as a person and yourself as a writer. And I knew that, so I found it interesting that Hurley perhaps didn't know that, or he'd come to a point where he'd forgotten it. So becoming a person, and for Hurley, a person was an individual with inner peace, with outer compassion, and for a willingness to think independently, therefore critically. And that is exactly what his novelistic characters, they rise to achieve. Interestingly, though, the opposite is true for his characters in his plays and short stories. They go right the other way. They go down the other way. What I want to read now is a short section from this book, from the introduction, where Hurley gets this revelation about personhood, and it shakes his world. And it's in the late 40s. He's in Black Mountain College. He doesn't really feel he belongs there at all. And this is what happens to him. Oh, sorry. Towards the end of 1947, Aeneas Nin came to the college on a 4-day visit. At the time, Nin was a diarist, avant-garde artist, and model. Her visit, as Hurley remembers, was just the most glamorous thing that ever happened to me, and I didn't take my eyes off her the whole time. They were to become intimate friends, she referring to him as my spiritual son. In an interview conducted over 20 years later, Hurley vividly recalled the influence that Nin's visit had on him as a fledgling writer. One of the things she asked me was what I hoped to do with my writing. I said I hoped I could write a novel. I was strongly under the influence of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. And I hoped I could write a novel that would make people feel how treacherous and sad it was that we all have some suffering in our lives. If we could just feel the suffering and somehow affect it and cause people to be more concerned with the idea of making less of it. That was my ambition. She said that seemed like a really good idea. And I said, "What do you do? What do you do with your writing?" She said, "I want to contribute to the world one fulfilled person, myself." There was a part of me that wanted to do something for the world, and that was like the beginning of, for me, a lifelong double-mindedness. There was this part of the me that wanted to do something for the world, and part of me that wanted to understand what it meant to be a fulfilled individual. I think she was the first person I ever encountered in my life who really understood that the great art form of the 20th century is the art of the person. If you want to affect the world you live in, first of all, you have to affect yourself. You have to affect the kind of being that you really think the world should be populated with. And that's what Anius did. It was the central and strongest and most enduring influence on me, and I'm forever grateful for it. So with Nin's departure, the experimental artistic atmosphere at Black Mountain began to seem stifling. Erlichie's desire to learn how to write clearly was frowned upon at Black Mountain. It was the artistic equivalent of drawing the perfect circle. As a result, he kept much of his writing private, asking only trusted friends such as Richards and Bong for advice. The critic Isaac Rosenfeld, then teaching creative writing at the college, disliked Herlihy's short stories intensely and encouraged his student to take an aptitude test to discover what else he could do with his life. Herlihy listened, and the test told him to be a writer. So despite that, or perhaps because of that criticism, Herlihy left Black Mountain to study acting in California. And during his life, he played a number of roles on the stage and in movies like Robert Parrish's In the French Style from 1963 and Arthur Penn's wonderful movie Four Friends from 1981. Herlihy wasn't a prolific writer, though by the end of the 1960s, his body of work was significant and was filled with enough complexity, controversy, dysfunctional suburban families, and sex to attract Hollywood. This resulted in two successful films. One of them was Philip Dunn's Blue Denim, 1959, and John Frankenheimer's All Fall Down, starring the great Yves Morisson and Warren Beatty. For me, this seems one of the ironies of Herlihy's life, Herlihy's writing. As the movies became ever popular, his writing and himself seemed to fade from view, never really able to leave the decade in which they were written. Herlihy was clearly hurt by the lack of critical attention, and this inevitably motivated him to quit writing. But there was another reason too. And I want to finish just by briefly reading another part of the book that just talks a little bit about that other reason. So at this home in Key West, and later in Los Angeles, he enjoyed socializing with friends, such as Williams and Isherwood. He enjoyed gardening and cooking and anticipating his annual shipment of wine, freshly harvested from the vineyards of Italy. He enjoyed teaching writing at City College, New York, where he hoped to give less of myself and more of an availability. He felt that writers shut themselves away like monks, and Herlihy no longer desired a self-imposed exile. However, as Bong said, even though he gave up writing, he was very much still a letter writer. He wrote to me constantly. There was never more than a sentence about current affairs in a letter of 5 pages. It was all very personal and intimate, about sex and death, but also about his joys and not much about his sorrows, on working on his garden, on cooking, with often a whole page devoted to a supper he had the night before, how he fixed the meal, something new that he had learned. Herlihy, but as much as there was a need to give up writing, there was also a compulsion for him to continue. Such tension is evident in a letter written to Richards in 1973. He says, "I'm trying to stage a reconciliation with the typewriter, with which machine I've been on the outs for some years, and it's an uphill path." Even so, no more of his work would be published. 3 of Hurley's short plays were performed off Broadway between 65 and 73, and their collective title upon publication, Stop, You're Killing Me, certainly reflected the mood of their author. One of those plays, Terrible Jim Fitch, is a story of a pimp and a prostitute in a motel outside Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was screened on the BBC's 30-minute theatre in 1971 and starred Nicole Williamson and Marianne Faithfull. Despite the respect this performance earned from reviewers, Stop, You're Killing Me marked the end of Herlihy's vocation as a published playwright. He became instead what Nin had called a self-fulfilled person. Cooking, teaching, and gardening became extensions of his creativity, not an end to it. "The garden here is terrific," Herlihy wrote beautifully to Richards in the winter of 1974. "The tomatoes have flowers on them. The lettuce has been thinned out. The Swiss chard is healthy. The beans and peas have begun to climb the maze of rainbow yarn on the fence. The sunflowers are a foot tall already. The cauliflower and broccoli are growing by leaps and bounds. The bell peppers are holding their own. The zinnies and marigolds have appeared." Thanks very much.
Thank each of you, and I know that Bob Geek from the bookstore has to leave to get back to the bookstore, so please come buy some books quickly before he has to pack them up. And thank you all for coming.